The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Welcome back to the Retro Rangers podcast. This is part 2 of our of all-time favorite Rangers. We're up to Marc listing his favorite Ranger forwards. Marc, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, George. So kind of begins, sort of either coincidentally or appropriately, with the great one, Wayne Gretzky, who, despite only playing 3 seasons in New York, had some really memorable moments for me, and a lot of other people, obviously. What stands out, the hat trick he had in the playoffs against Florida, Van Beesbrook, beating him. It was actually a natural hat trick. It was like at that point, I can't remember how old he was at that point, but, the idea that he was still producing, at least reliably, and, compared to what you would think a player at his age at that point. And it's just a shame. It's a shame that obviously it was towards the end. It's a shame that after he got here, Messier was moved on. So the two of them didn't get to play together as much as everyone had hoped. But honestly, as great as he is and all the records, and I admired him as an Oiler, I admired him as a Ranger. The biggest reason he's on this list is because he played his very last game on my birthday. And it was April 18th, 1999. And pretty much ever since then, I have made it a point to collect things that are either associated with his final game, specifically, have the date on them, since it's really the date that resonates with me. And I have this little Gretzky shrine that I kind of created. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that he happened to pick that day to say goodbye. So that's pretty cool. And now, more recently, I'm going to actually group, I mentioned before when we were talking about LaRouche, Marian Gaborik and Artemi Panarin to me are very similar. And, we're talking elite forwards, elite scorers, players who, for the most part, when they're coming in, or they're taking a shot, you just figure, it's not a question of is it going to go in, it's just where's it going to go in. Gaborik in particular, a lot of Ranger fans knew Marian Gaborik before he got here because he actually scored 5 goals against us as a Minnesota Wild. But then, once he was here, he had some injury issues, but he broke 40 goals twice. Not too many Rangers have been able to do that. And, he was just an elite scorer. Scored some big overtime goals, got a triple overtime goal against Washington in the playoffs. And I guess like other elite scorers, he ran into a coach, Tortorella started to expect him to do things beyond just score, like block shots and things like that. And it kind of soured the relationship a little bit, and he got moved on to Columbus. And then he turned around and won a cup with LA against us. So good for him in that sense. And Brad, is just a great player. He's an elite player who had a very good spring, 2 springs ago. Obviously, no one really, other than Igor, put up a spring that we would have liked this past spring against the Devils. But, Panarin to me is just what you want. In fact, I will say, I know it's a little bit off topic, but if we start talking about what to expect for next year, I feel like there are a lot of things that are pointing towards him just being just utter beast mode next year. I think between Laviolette coming in as a coach and between, the whole shaving his head, getting more focused, whatever it is, I feel like he's gonna really surprise a lot of people as to how much he turns it on, not just in the regular season, but in the playoffs too. And then back to the time when we were going to the finals and the Eastern Conference Final, Matt Zuccarello. Who doesn't love Zuccarello? It's just like the guy just does so many things, and yet he's 5'8", doing all these, things that bigger men do, as far as putting up numbers like that, going in the corners, I got to meet Zook once at a Toys for Tots thing. Just great sense of humor, really nice guy. And Marty St. Louis, same thing. Came in late in his career. Somebody I admired his entire career, Calgary and then Tampa Bay, and always wished he was on the Rangers. And he got to be here, and I got to see him score that goal against Pittsburgh on Mother's Day. And that is just, to date, that's the best live moment I've ever seen at MSG. So he was responsible. And I got to meet him, a couple weeks ago for the second time, I guess, but at that shoulder showcase. So, and my last choice, as far as current, would be Mika Zibanejad. He's a solid two-way player. We all know. I mean, there really doesn't have to be too much said about him. I think everybody knows what he brings or what he's done in New York. Just a ridiculously one-sided trade to get him here for Broussard. It's just got to be one of the best trades in Ranger history up there.
Right.
And
Mika Zibanejad is the poster child for why you don't give up on a young prospect too soon.
Exactly. That's right. You're right.
Right.
Yeah, because he didn't really have big numbers, when we got him, or in Ottawa. It wasn't like he was somebody that, they were trading that it would be like, why are they, he wasn't doing it yet. But, yeah, you're absolutely right. And who knows? You never know. The other thing is you never really know. Like, if he had stayed in Ottawa, would he have blossomed the way he did in New York? Who knows? Maybe he doesn't get the number one center spot up there or, those kinds of things. So a lot of it is the talent of the individual, but it's also the circumstances, that they're in. But it's sort of a common theme with me because I have a little birthday connection with him because he and I share the same birthday. So when I met him, a couple months ago, had him sign something there. So it's kind of nice to have links like that with players that go a little bit beyond, just watching them and things like that. So
that's great.
So I guess now we still have some player forwards that we left off, but we kind of grouped them together because they're from the '94 team.
Right.
Right. So.
All right. We're going to do commons, or we're going to read them down?
Well, we can do some commons. We have 4. It looks like there are 4 overlaps. So why don't we do those 4? Yeah.
Okay. Hello.
So you there, George?
Yeah. Okay.
So you want to talk about Mess?
Yeah. Well, Marc Messier. I mean, he's the guy who brought us the cup. You can't argue with that. I mean, the Rangers have never had a leader like Marc Messier, and then they might, never have another one like Marc Messier. So he's a guy who grabbed the team by the neck, and he's the guy who got us the cup, and there's no argument about that. Without him, we would not have won that cup.
No question about it.
He's the guy we have to thank for that. Adam Graves. Adam Graves is my all-time favorite Ranger. He's just a wonderful guy. I always said if I had a son, I want him to grow up to be like Adam Graves. He's the kind of player who can score goals. He can protect the smaller players, and he scores big goals. He was a very good Ranger for a very long time, and it was a sad day when they had to trade him. I just hated it. Alex Kovalev, he was crazy. I remember seeing those between periods clips of him with a beanie on, with a propeller on his head, and the thought that he flies a plane. I said, "Oh Jesus, Alex Kovalev! Oh my God!"
Yeah.
Well, you have to remember, on the Cup team, what was he? 21.
Exactly. Yep.
He was a young kid, first time away from home, from Russia. He's living in New York City. He's having the time of his life.
Yeah. That one time that Keenan left him on the ice for like 2 or 3 minutes at a time.
Exactly.
And the Kovalev thought, that he was being rewarded. But, Keenan just left him out there, you know. So
he actually drew 2 penalties and scored a goal on that shift. It was like he didn't look winded at all when you watch it. It's ridiculous.
Matteau. I mean, the guy came here and nobody probably knew who he was, but now we do. And he scored one of the biggest goals in Ranger history. And I'm happy he did. So.
And don't forget, he scored almost the second biggest. There's 3 games before that. He scored another double overtime goal. It's like that's just how many. I threw the question out on like who's done that? Who scored same player 2 double overtime goals in the same series? I mean, I can't imagine not many players have done that. Let alone a guy who's averages 15 goals or 20 goals a year. You know what I mean? He wasn't like a big potent scorer. It's amazing.
Nick Kyprios. He's the kind of guy who probably never thought he'd get his name on the Stanley Cup, but he's the kind of guy that teams need. He's that kind of role player that teams need, and I'm glad we had him. And Steve Larmer, I always thought that he was a very key member of that Ranger team. Mm-hmm. I remember when he first came here, a few games into his Ranger career, he hurt his hand somehow. And he had a penalty shot against Chicago, and he scored. And I think all he could do was wind up and take a slap shot.
Exactly.
And
against Eddie Belfour, not exactly, not too shabby a goaltender.
Well, it makes you wonder what kind of relationship they had together when they were teammates.
Yeah.
And I was also very impressed and learned that he used to take an ice bath before every game, and I just can't think about that. Sorry.
Just a couple comments on the players you mentioned. You mentioned Kovalev and that extended shift. The other thing that stands out, Brian Leach, a couple times during interviews, he was asked, who was the most talented player you ever played with or against? Yeah. And he actually said Alex, not Mario Lemieux, not Wayne Gretzky, not Marc. I mean, you think about the players he played. But what he's referring to is just the innate, his stick handling ability. It wasn't who's the highest scoring player, obviously, but it was just the way he handled the puck. In close quarters, he could make moves. When there was no room and that kind of thing. And it was obviously he faced him. Once he got traded too. So there's that. Nick Kyprios is kind of an interesting thing because he, if you think about it, between him and Joey Koster, the Rangers kind of had 2 enforcers on that team when, for the most part, at least in that time, maybe in the 80s. In the 80s, you had McSorley and Semenko right on the Oilers, and so that wasn't that was pretty common. But as you got to, it wasn't really that common to have more than one guy, and they were sort of part of the Black Aces where they didn't necessarily both play every game. But, like you said, he was pretty lucky to get it because they could have just said, hey, we're going with Joey Koster and, and that's all we need, And Steve Larmer, I mean, I hear that name and the first thing I think of is the picture of everybody celebrating when the buzzer went off in Game 7 against Vancouver, and there's Larmer in the corner still finishing his check. I mean, he's like, you never know. What if he's? I can just picture what's going through his mind. We already gave up all those last-second goals. Can you imagine? Yeah. He's like, this is not going to happen again. I don't even care if I hear the buzzer or not. It's just that is just that is a champion right there. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I hear his name, the word that comes to mind is professional.
Yeah.
He was all business.
Yeah. He's also one of these guys that, for the most part, most people don't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame yet. It's like he should be in there. And we look at look at his numbers and what he did in New York and Chicago. It's that, and sometimes also when you think about who the people that are actually, or the players that are actually getting inducted, and you start doing a comparison kind of thing. You think, man,
but
there's I know there's a lot of question marks in that regard.
That's one of the complaints about the Hall of Fame vote is that it's more of a beauty contest than
Yeah.
than who the best players are.
Yeah.
We could do a whole show about that.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, you're right.
Anyway, do you want to move on to defensemen?
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Let's do the overlaps.
Okay, George, you and me picked some guy named Brad Park. Never heard of him.
Yeah, the guy who would have been the best defenseman in the NHL, except for some guy named Orr.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know if they kept stats back then. He said he had some ridiculous most second place votes for the Norris, ever or something like that.
Yep.
It was really well. Luckily I've been able to. I met him at the hockey house. He came, and here's a guy traded not towards the tail end of his career, right in the middle of his career is when he got dealt a book, and he spent a large chunk of his career in Boston. He still comes back to New York, and and people talk to you. I know people have talked about why isn't his number retired and things like that. So it's amazing when you think about the sort of the small amount of time that he spent in the city, and yet just revered and deservedly so with what he did offensively, defensively, everything.
And ironically, they love him as much in Boston as the people in New York love him.
Yeah, you're right. There's not too many players that could say that. You're right.
No.
Yeah.
Right. But he was my first favorite player. It was the first hockey book I ever read, Play the Man. I remember that. It was actually in my school library. I mean, the school library had like 2 hockey books, and that was, that was like elementary school, and that was one of them. And I was like, oh, I got to read this. And it was just great. And then I met him at the hockey house, and he lives in, I guess he kind of commutes he's like a snowbird between Florida and Boston. But, I was wearing my Leafs jersey, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? I got traded when I was wearing that number. It was so funny. And I didn't even walk up to him yet. He was already yelling across the room, making jokes. He was just a really nice guy.
Yeah, really nice. When I interviewed him for the Emil Francis book, I was supposed to, call him at a certain time, 9 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was. And he, after an hour or so, he said he had to go, but he probably knew that I wasn't done because I always ask my questions in order, And so he said, why don't you call me tomorrow morning, same time? So, it's he didn't have to do that, So and he did. It's just cool. A great guy. Just a great guy. And, as far as Clark's concerned, he represented to my generation anyway, our hope. He was our Bobby Orr. I mean, he was he used to he could score, he could hit, he could do those open ice hip checks. Yeah. He would skate up ice with his free hand swinging back and forth. Just a great player to watch. Everybody wanted to be Brad Park.
Yeah, exactly.
So the next guy that George and I have on our list is Jim Nielsen, the Chief. Guy was just a solid defenseman.
Yeah.
Was there every game, and he was defense first, and he was excellent. Just an excellent all-around player. And when you learn about what his background was, he was sent to an orphanage as a young kid and grew up in the orphanage to make it to the NHL coming out of an orphanage.
Wow, I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah, as an indigenous kid from Canada is quite the achievement.
Right. He was actually the first hockey player I ever met. I met him in Jerry Cosby's by the Old Garden. I was in there just looking around, and he was sitting on a bench trying on skate. And I went up to him. I shook his hand. And I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and he was a guy. Give him the juice. So.
And it's funny, today, people would be all over you by calling him the Chief, but it was meant as to honor him, to honor his heritage, not to mock him.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're right. That's right. Good point.
Right. Barry Beck. Or as my father would say, Barry Beck. When they got him, my father called me up, and all he said was Barry Beck, because he was so thrilled that they finally got a big defenseman. And unfortunately, he had shoulder injuries, and he didn't really do what we thought he was going to do. But he was still a quality Ranger. And if you read some of his posts on Facebook, he's a great writer. He's very involved with the Marc tragedy, and very nice guy. Very nice guy.
Just very open. I mean, he's probably the first player I ever had a poster of in my bedroom as a kid. I remember that, and like you said, he was just him and Reijo Ruotsalainen were like Mutt and Jeff. It was like this really huge guy and this Smurf playing together. I remember that. And, he fought. He had, some pretty big battles. I think he was involved in that melee in L.A. in '81, if I remember correctly, out at, 2 in the morning, I'm watching this fight, And, but you're right about social media. I mean, there was just, I forget how it started, but I just commented on something. He is so upfront and open about everything. I mean, just, I've never, there's plenty of players have a presence on social media, but he confided in a lot of things. I happened to mention the whole Flatley hit, and he was pretty open about, that he basically went into a depression from that. The idea that he went from being this, potential Norris Trophy winner or whatever, or, league leading defenseman to, almost, losing his career, so he thought. So it took him a while to kind of bounce back from that, and then the issues with Ted Sater, he had to deal with that, and he's been through a lot emotionally, and that's just professionally, as you mentioned. There's personal things have gone on with him that are just, that
nobody should have to go through.
Exactly. Right. So just, it's like somebody you already have a lot of admiration for, and then you just learn more about them, who they are as people. It just becomes like, wow, now he's just, just somebody who you just look up to and respect. So.
Right. All right, I guess we can all agree on Brian Leach.
I think so. I suppose.
What's not to like?
Yeah.
Just an outstanding player. Just in every way, shape, or form.
Yep, I agree. He's my all-time favorite player. I wear his jersey more than anybody else's. So many things about him, as a player. But even beyond like this, like I actually think back, and so many players that are great players, you think of like when Gretzky scored a hat trick or Messier's guarantee, or that. Like for me, all the things I remember from Leach playing are these like no nonsense things. Like his ability to keep the puck in at the line was just insane.
Yeah.
Like it'd be wound around the glass. We're not talking about the board, like way up on the glass, and or just anticipate up the middle. He would cut it off. I'm like, he just did so many things that were so heady, for the game. And then, and it's not like he did all those things and then nothing came of it. He wasn't like a defensive player and then didn't put up tons of points and all that. But just perfect. He even got more physical. When he first came in the league, he wasn't really as physical as people wanted. He started hip checking people in '94 and all this other stuff. I mean, like you said, there's just, I can't think of any aspect to the game of a defenseman that, he wasn't elite at. It's just amazing. So.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: how much of an influence was Marc Messier on Brian Leach's career?
Oh, a huge amount. And Brian readily admits it. I mean, I think
tremendous,
he was always like, he would say, I mean, from a playing point of view, right? When they were on the ice together, and they were on the ice together a lot. It was like go go go. It's like I'm getting. It was like Paul Coffey, reincarnated. It's like, just go and, I'll get you the puck and do what you do. Otherwise, if Ness wasn't around, maybe Leach doesn't get, maybe he's a solid offensive defenseman, but maybe he doesn't hit like record-setting numbers the way he did.
And I think that was one of the things that I've heard Leach say in an interview, that Messier was the one who convinced him how good he really was. He knew he was a decent player, a good player.
Exactly.
But Messier was the one who convinced him that he was a phenomenal player, and he shouldn't have any doubts.
And you think about
himself.
So he's hearing that from Marc. I mean, in 91, 92, right? He wins an Irish trophy that year. And then all of a sudden 93, 94 comes, and he's got a coach basically telling him the exact opposite. Like, you're nobody, we're going to trade you, we want Chris Chelios and all this other stuff. It's like, so for him to perform to that degree, now you could argue maybe Keenan did that almost to do like a good cop, bad cop thing maybe with him, because he knew Marc was in his ear about all the good things he was doing. Or if not, it's just like so much even more for him to overcome and play at the level that he did that spring. Is like, it's not like he had the whole support from everybody. It wasn't like that kind of thing. It was, so that's just even more impressive. And I don't know. And and then you hear him. The more you hear him, since he's retired, Brian talking about, what he went through and just how he fought. Like you said, Ness told him how he fought. When Leach got drafted or even went to the draft, he was thinking, this isn't for me. This is other people. I'm not the kind of person that will get, this is people from Connecticut. Who from Connecticut? Now it's like a common thing, but who from Connecticut gets drafted for the NHL, let alone the Rangers? Yeah. It's like, so it's sort of, even then, and I don't think he's like false modesty. He really was like, okay, I think I'm pretty good, but I'm good in, Avon. I'm not good necessarily across the country. Yeah.
I was good in college, but.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So that's, there's a lot of players like that I've heard, and you're amazed at how almost insecure they are. You think, God, this is like a Hall of Fame player, and they actually have all these insecurities. It's sometimes I guess that's what makes them better players. That might drive them to be better, but still pretty wild to hear. So, good question, George.
Good. That's why I'm here.
All right. So next up, we've got a D-man that I selected. He was my first favorite player when I was a young kid, first watching the Rangers. I came across the Rangers on TV on a Saturday night on a black and white television. I had no idea what this game was. My father wasn't a hockey fan at the time. And I just came across it, and I was fascinated by it. And that player is Arnie Brown, another one of these just solid defenseman. And this is in the early days when the Rangers weren't very good. And he's one of the guys that he and Rod Sealing were two guys that Emil Francis brought in to shore up the defense.
That's right. They were part of the Andy Baskey trade, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then next we jump way ahead. Dave Maloney. The youngest captain in Ranger history.
Yep.
Was a pretty good player for quite a while. And then when he was having trouble with Mr. Sater, they unceremoniously sent him to Buffalo towards the end of his career when he was banged up some.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, he's had multiple careers, first as an NHL player, then as a stock trader on Wall Street for 20-plus years, and for the last 23 years, he's been the color man on Ranger broadcasts.
Yeah, exactly.
And then we've got from that time Ronnie Greshner. Everybody was hoping he would be the next Brad Park. And he certainly put up some great offensive numbers, spent his entire career with the Rangers, but he wasn't quite in the same class as Brad Park, but still a great player.
And he had a very pretty wife.
Yes.
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 That was common in those days. He and Duguay.
Yeah, well. Yeah.
Yep, Kim Alexis, too, yeah, that's right.
Yep.
The thing I remember about Greshner, actually, he scored the winning goal in Game 6, right, against the Islanders in the playoffs.
Yep.
And he had a very deceptive way. Everything he did to me was like in slow motion. Like he wasn't really, he would peek, but he wouldn't do it. Yeah, and it was sort of like, you just felt like, it looked like, oh, he's going to run out of time, or why doesn't he, go back and forth with the puck a little faster, and yet he would still score. He would just tuck it in or just around the goalies or whatever. I just,
Tremendous puck control.
In fact, he ended up playing forward later in his career. Remember,
Well, I think Sater made him a forward to just try and get more offense before they brought LaRouche back up from Hershey.
That's right.
He had him playing as a forward on the power play.
Instead of LaRouche. There you go.
Yeah.
And he was a captain, too. Right, so.
Yep.
And a very nice guy. Met him a few times at, around MSG. Really chatty and good guy.
So, George?
James Patrick was a guy who got screwed by Keenan, too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But now, but James Patrick had some injury problems, too, while he was in New York. And that one year they made him wear the horse collar.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I forgot about that.
Because of his neck. And I know I've heard him in interviews say he hated that thing. And another guy from that era that you brought up, have on your list, George, Tom Laidlaw.
Yeah. He was just a good, solid defenseman. Good, solid, stay-at-home defenseman. I always liked him.
Yep.
Yeah, he's another number two. And,
number two.
And he's mentioned that he'll go into MSG and look up at Leach's bat. Hey, look, they retired my number.
Yes.
He's just a really fun. I mean, these guys have such great sense of humor about stuff. Yeah. And Laylo is very active on social media. He's got several podcasts going. He's just he's out there.
Yeah, so, he's done some recent interviews. One with Neil Smith. They interviewed Pierre LaRouche a few weeks ago. Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You should look up that podcast, Marc.
Oh, I will.
They've interviewed some really interesting former Rangers and other people, too. So, next up on my list was Dan Girardi. What can you say? Another solid defensive defenseman. Need a shot block? He's your man.
Somebody showed the stats, the shot blocking stats, like both he and McDonough were like over 1,000, and then like the next highest is like 600 or something, and it was just like, these guys, just, that's your job, like every day, you get smacked. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. And the next guy on my list, who's on the current team, is kind of a throwback to Dan Girardi, Ryan Lindgren.
Absolutely.
Just a solid defensive defenseman. And he's a little bit better offensively than people give him credit for.
I was just going to mention that.
He just happens to play with this other guy who's going to be a Norris candidate for the rest of his career.
Exactly. Yeah. No, that goal he scored against Jersey, top corner from like no angle. I mean, Girardi. I remember one goal against the Islanders Girardi scored that was pretty good, but wasn't to that extent. And I feel like when you were asking about, the influence of Messier on Leach, I feel like somebody needs to be in Ryan's head. Go, like go for it. Don't just think, well, I can't do that, or that's not my job, or that's Adam's job. I feel like you're right. I feel like if he had a different mindset or just encouragement all the time to go off, he could become, because you know what he is physically and defensively. So imagine if he put up even just 10, 15 goals, a season. It would just be like just rock solid.
Okay.
So we had one other defenseman that the only one I chose was Reijo Ruotsalainen, who was just one of my favorite players to watch. The guy is still considered one of the best skaters to ever really play in the NHL. He would again, another Smurf, 5'8", could skate like the wind, and just he had this very interesting stride. He almost looked like his torso wasn't moving, and it was just like his legs. It was like all legs. Yeah. You know what I mean? It was just, that. I also remember his ability, like, up until then, there weren't that many players one-timing the puck. It wasn't as common, as it was when Ovechkin came up, and now Mika and, other players. And he would, not only was he a great at one-timing it, but he would do it where he was let's say at the line, and someone would pass him. He'd be skating backwards away from the pass, and just before he got to the boards, he would let it go. And it's like your momentum is going in the opposite direction from where you're shooting. And I used to spend hours in front of my house on roller skates trying to figure out how he did that. And it was like, it's just so many things you have to worry about, keeping the puck on your stick, in the right spot, you don't back up too fast or whatever. And, and a lot of times I would just do it myself, so I didn't have anybody passing it to me. But still, I never forget that. There weren't that many players who I admired and also tried to emulate when I played. You know what I mean? Yeah. So he was probably the first in that sense.
And the amazing thing about him was, guy was 5'8", 170, soaking wet.
Yeah, exactly.
But he had this shot, just an amazing shot.
Yeah.
Got it off quickly, and it was hard.
Yeah.
He could get that shot through.
They used to call him Plexi Rexy, right? Because he used to miss the net a fair amount. But he certainly, cranked it up, really well. And
well, he had a couple 20 goal seasons in New York.
Yep.
128.
He's also the last Ranger defenseman, I think, to get a hat trick, or now I'm blanking it. Has Fox had a hat trick yet? Why am I not remembering? Oh no, Tony DeAngelo scored a hat trick. That's what it was. But before that, it was not Leach. Everyone's like, oh, Leach's only hat trick came in the playoffs, but he actually didn't ever score a regular season hat trick. But before that was actually Ruotsalainen, and actually had the previous defenseman hat trick. So pretty wild.
Okay, guys, we're running low on time again. So you want to do a third show?
That sounds good. I'm good. I'm up for it.
I'm up for it if you are.
We'll do goalies and announcers and GMs and coaches and all that stuff. Okay.
Sure. Sounds good.
People listening, thanks for listening. Please remain with us while we go to a third show. Hold on.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.